Okay, so Eruv. So Eruv, what is an Eruv? What is the basis of this concept of an Eruv? Okay, what is it all about? Okay, so a little background firstly. We know, although we haven't discussed it during this course, we know that when it comes to Shabbos, there are 39 melachot. There are 39 categories of forbidden creative activity on Shabbos. 39 different categories. Okay. Not 39 different types of work, but 39 different types of creative activity. The 39th one, and it's no significance with it being the last one, but it just happens to be. The last one is known as Hotza'ah, which should spell as Hotzah, A''AH. Hotza'ah. Hotzah, A''AH. Hotza'ah. Okay? Hotza'ah, generally translated to mean carrying, more literally means transferring from one domain to another. Hotza'ah is the prohibition on Shabbos of transferring something from one domain to another. And in particular, we mean transferring something from a private domain into a public domain, and vice versa. So from a public domain into a private domain. That is generally prohibited on Shabbos. It doesn't matter how large or small the item is, it's the act of transference which is forbidden. Okay, there's no work involved. It could be a feather, or it could be a ton of feathers. Or a ton of bricks, whichever's heavier. Thank you, Lisa, for clarifying that. It's not about the work involved, it's about the creative activity involved, the transference from one domain to another. That is what's known as Hotza'ah. That is forbidden on Shabbos. Now, when we talk about a private domain, it's in the Torah. I can't give you the exact reference. No, I didn't have it with me this week. I'm sorry. Okay. When we talk about a private domain, what do we mean by a private domain? Okay. We're a bit more specific than that. We refer. It doesn't just have to be a house. A house can be a private domain. So your home, yes.
A gated.
Yes.
In a property.
Okay. I'll give you the definition.
No, I'm thinking of a gated.
I'll give you the definition. A fully enclosed area. A fully enclosed area, regardless of ownership. So you could be in a field that is surrounded on all sides by fences, and that can be considered to be a private domain. Okay, does that make sense? So it doesn't just have to be a house. It can be It can be an open area as long as it's meaning not surrounded by four walls, but some way surrounded on all four sides and fully enclosed. That creates it as a private domain. So transferring from something which is fully enclosed to something which is not fully enclosed is what is prohibited by this malach, this prohibition of Hotza'ah. It will become more clear as we go along. So an Eruv. What does an Eruv do? And what does Eruv mean? No. Eruv literally means mingling or merging. The concept of an Eruv is the merging of different domains into one. And specifically the mingling of boundaries, which merges private and public domains to make them into one private domain. Okay. So let's take our map for a second. You see you're looking a little bit confused, yes?
No.
Let's take our maps. Take your map. Doesn't work very well on the black and white copy, but you'll see the red line running around the map. Yes? And I'll draw your attention particularly, if you look on the bottom left-hand corner, we see the NW2. Yes? Okay? But thank God Brent Cross is. Okay? In fact, it's not actually. It's not. Only half. Only the Jewish end of Brent Cross is included. Oh, very good. Thank you, Francis. That's right. That's right. You know about the Jewish woman who told her family she wanted to be buried there, yes? Because then she'd be guaranteed that her family will visit her. Okay. Haven't started yet. So you'll see that an NW2 running down. Very interestingly, you can see firstly, is this what you would by our limited definition of a private domain? Would you in any way? This in fact is what's known as the Northwest London Eruv. For obvious reasons. But were you in any way defined by our previously understood definition of a private domain to define this as a private domain? No. It's about as public as you can get, really? Yes. And yet, because it is fully enclosed around its perimeter.
Oh, I see. So they've made a public domain into a private domain.
Absolutely, they've merged. What we've done is they've merged both private and public domains into one large private domain. Okay? How have they done that? Well, a number of ways. The one way I just want to draw your attention to very quickly is at the bottom left-hand corner again, NW2. They've used pretty much a lot of existing boundaries because it just makes it a lot easier. So you can see, for example, if you run down NW2, the number 2, you stay close to the number 2. If I'm correct, there should be a red line running down diagonally down. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah.
What is that bordering? Yes, it's the Hendon or Watford Way, whichever you want to look at it. Yes, the A41. Okay? Which is a busy road.
Yeah.
And fortunately, because it is a busy road, it has a very nice, permanent, solid boundary. A nice fence and wall all the way along. If you see at the other side, you want to go to the top right-hand corner, running up diagonally. Let's check I've got it right. Yes, running up and down from NW7 down to N2. What boundary is being used there? It's the railway tracks. Yes, again, very convenient because railway tracks are often bordered by nice, solid walls and fences. Okay? And all the way around, pretty much that's what's being used. If there are any gaps, those gaps are closed up in a way that we'll describe in a moment. Okay, so that was just purely by way of illustration of how an Eruv merges different domains. Private domains, those which are, by definition, like a house is fully enclosed, fully surrounded, and those which are not. And by surrounding all of them by one enclosure, they become mingled and merged. Okay, they become an Eruv. Okay, so the Eruv means a merged domain. Okay, is that all clear? Is that point clear? Yes, Jackie.
We have one here.
As where we live on an island, why don't we just make the whole of the country?
Okay, good question. That's a good question. I'll come on to that a bit later.
Have them from time to time.
I'll come on to that a bit later, yeah.
It must be to do with height. Because you said that they're boundaries, that they're fences. Or
Yes, the borders have to be a certain height. We'll come on to that in a moment. Okay, so I want to get down the conceptual idea of it. Okay, right. So a boundary, an Eruv is a boundary recognised by halakha, by Jewish law, within which, specifically, the previously prohibited hotzah, transference from one domain to another, is permitted. Because once we've merged both private and public domains into one large private domain, just as there's no prohibition of carrying in a private domain, you're allowed to carry in your own home, transfer something within that home, so too in this now extended home, you're allowed to transfer objects. Okay?
You said creative. So what is the definition of creative in these terms?
Not for tonight. Okay?
Okay.
That's a whole discussion about Shabbos. But in terms of, that's what I said, it's not about work, it's not about physical effort, it's about the concept of being constructive. By transferring something from one domain to another, you're constructively moving something from one place to another. Okay? Is that clear?
I don't understand, but yes, okay.
Which bit don't you
Well,
understand?
to me, something which is constructed is something that's built, but by taking...
Not constructed, constructive. Constructive activity. Okay? Like writing, that's not constructed, it's constructive. Yeah?
Or actual physics.
Like switching on a light. It's not work, there's no effort involved, but it's constructive because you're creating something. Okay? It's creative, constructive activity. Okay? So transferring something from one place to another is a constructive act. Okay. So the Eruv defines an area as an enclosed residential communal entity, thus allowing people to carry from their homes to the street or to other people's houses or to shul. Okay?
Within the Eruv.
Within the Eruv, yes. Within this merged area. Now Eruvim, which is the plural, are especially helpful to families with young children who want to use a pram or a buggy outside their home on Shabbos, to people who need to use a wheelchair or walking frame, and others will find it useful and need to be able to carry their house keys, reading glasses and books, etc.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Couldn't you use the M25 as the boundary, as the Eruv?
Some do, yes. Yes.
Therefore, the whole of London is like...
I'll come on to that, why you can't make the whole of London into one great Eruv in a minute. Okay? Okay, so within an Eruv you can carry outside your home in the same way as you can carry in your own home and garden. But what is important to note is that is the only thing an Eruv allows you to do. All other Shabbos restrictions are still unaffected, are still in place. Okay? Is that clear? That's a very important point. People think with an Eruv you can do anything you like on Shabbos. No, it's pure. An Eruv is all the Eruv allows you to do is to transfer from one domain to another, because we've now merged all the domains together.
Is the Eruv a modern concept, or is it something that's always been around?
Excellent question. No, and the concept of an Eruv has always been around. It's always been around. And in fact, again, another visual aid to bring you. This is one. In fact, it's a combination of four. But within this volume of Gemara, there is one whole tractate, one whole section that deals with the laws, the concepts, and the ideas, and the discussions on these concepts of Eruv. So it goes back to Sinai itself. Okay. So all other Shabbos restrictions still apply. In an Eruv you are, as we said, permitted to transfer from one domain to another. What are you permitted to transfer? Not everything. You are permitted to carry things like your house keys, food and drink for use on Shabbos, the talis, books, required medication, clothes, reading glasses, and we said pushing a buggy, a pram, or a wheelchair. However, you may not carry or transfer a mobile phone or any other item which we would consider, which is termed as muksa. M-U-K-T-S-E-H. M-U-K-T-S-E-H. Now, muksa is another area of Jewish law with regard to Shabbos. Muksa refers to any item which is not permitted to be touched or moved on Shabbos, because its use is at variance to things which are permitted on Shabbos. Okay, so for example, a hammer. You can't use a hammer on Shabbos. You can't start hammering on Shabbos, and therefore a hammer, by definition, is muksa. It's forbidden to be moved or touched on Shabbos in case you come to use it. Okay? So carrying a hammer in the street on Shabbos, not sure, may or may not be an offensive weapon, we're not sure. Without reasonable excuse. Or a pen, let's say a pen, that's a perfect example. Writing on Shabbos is forbidden, and therefore a pen is, you're forbidden to touch or move a pen unless you strictly need to. If it's on laying on your Shabbos table, you need to clear a space. If you have to move, then you can move it. But to just pick up a pen, put it in your pocket or walk around with it on Shabbos is forbidden because that is considered to be muksa. It's set aside for a weekday activity, something you can't do on Shabbos. So you couldn't carry that in an Eruv. Simply a wallet or a purse. Carrying anything that can only be used after Shabbos, you cannot carry on Shabbos. Similarly, carrying and opening an umbrella.
Okay.
Okay, you can't carry or open an umbrella even when there's an Eruv. Because it's something you can't do on Shabbos. Why? You said why? Okay, why? Why can't you,
just curious.
even without an Eruv,
Yeah.
why can't you put it
No,
on there?
if you've got an error.
You've got an Eruv. Because you're not allowed to open an umbrella on Shabbos, whether there's an Eruv or not. Because opening an umbrella is like making a tent, which is forbidden on Shabbos.
So putting a rain hat on isn't making a tent over the
No. No.
What about
Rain hat's fine.
if the
Yeah,
umbrella
and wearing is not considered to be carrying.
What about if the umbrella's
Well,
on
if-
the day before?
Okay, that's a good.
And you don't put it down when you get to the other place.
Okay.
Just in case.
The problem with that is what we know as Morris Ayin, not Morris Owen. Yeah, friend with Oliver Sholem. Marit Ayin literally means the negative eye, but people will see. They won't know that you've had it up since before Shabbos. So they'll see they think you put it up on Shabbos, and they may come to do it because they think, here's someone who knows what they're doing. If you've done it, it must be okay, and they'll go and do it. Okay. Okay. So yes. So carrying an opening umbrella, engaging in weekday activities which are not in the spirit of Shabbos are also still not permitted in an Eruv. So for example, riding a bike, not really a Shabbos sticker activity, or going shopping. Okay, so even if Brent Cross was in Eruv, okay, just even going to look, or even if you've got a good credit rating and they'll give it to you on credit, and you can take it home with you. It's not really within the spirit of Shabbos, so even though there's an Eruv, it's not permitted to do that on Shabbos. Yeah.
Not to ride a bike, you said.
Mm.
What about, in the same thing, a scooter?
Scooter,
Yes.
I'd like to see it, Francis.
No, not
Right.
Children,
Children.
yeah, children normally
Yes,
we're a bit more
that's
lenient. They'll
Yeah,
let
because-
children,
Yeah.
yeah. As long as if they're not particularly aware of the fact that it's forbidden, then we wouldn't say anything. Let them do it.
Oh,
Once they
yeah.
reach an age where they shouldn't really be doing it.
No, to transport oneself from one end
Oh,
of the suburb to the other end of the suburb.
they should ask their local rabbi.
Right.
Yes, Shirley.
Electric invalid scooter.
Rabbi,
Have one, is there?
can I give you clarification?
It's okay, we've got an expert on these things. Yes.
The normal mobility scooter, the electric scooter, is forbidden to be used on Shabbos within an Eruv.
Right.
There is one exception which is available from Israel,
Zomic.
which has been modified and special to Udat Kasher, I don't know the technical word for it, is permitted
Yes.
because it is not switched on and off on
That's right.
Shabbat.
That's right.
And they've
Yes.
allowed, there's some electronic device. You actually change from the normal switching on and off to a completely different system of running it.
Yes.
And for your information, it's available in this country for £7,000. Right. I do not
Checks
like
can be made payable. Okay, so no, in multiple ways. So, although using a wheelchair or other mobility device is permitted in an Eruv, it still would not. The Eruv does not allow you to contravene other prohibitions on Shabbos. So, the use of electricity within the Eruv is still prohibited. Okay.
Use an electric wheelchair, you can use an
You couldn't use an electric unless it's been adapted especially for use on Shabbos. And the way this electric one works is very like a Shabbos lift, right? Where it's not you, by you sitting on it doesn't actually make it go. There's a delayed reaction in it, so it's not. There's no direct.
Completely different system.
Yes.
I don't want to complicate tonight's interesting
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I wanted to
Okay.
make sure that you understood.
Thank you. No, I
It's
do. Yeah,
forbidden.
lovely. Okay. Any other questions?
So you can't go from 10 year mum.
No. Okay. So frequently asked questions about an Eruv. How does an Eruv work? How does it actually work?
Oh,
Well, if several houses, this is the basis of it. If several houses are built around a closed courtyard, then they can be considered as one single giant house. And so things could be carried between them. The continuous boundary of an Eruv effectively turns a large area into a sort of imaginary courtyard within which everyone is permitted to carry objects or push prams and wheelchairs, activities which otherwise would be forbidden on Shabbos. Okay, so again, it's another way of looking at it. What we're doing is, it's as if we've taken, I would say in olden days, but you ever see developments, old style developments where, not particularly in this country, but on the continent you sometimes see squares. Yes? Courtyards.
Lives in one.
You live
It's
in one?
enclosed.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's exactly the thing that we're talking about, yes? So the houses were often built around a communal square, but the houses were completely joined together at all sides. So the internal courtyard is actually part of, it belongs jointly to everybody.
Yeah.
So everybody could, in theory, go from their house, take something out of their house, and walk through the public courtyard into someone else's house, because they're all considered to be one private domain. Okay? In theory. In theory. Okay, so that's the concept of it. So in Eruv, so that's the theory of it. So an Eruv converts an area in which there were once many individual homes, so even if you don't have the enclosure because the houses, there are gaps between the houses. So for example, let's take this street for example. Let's take this street and because it's quite a square, these few streets, aren't they? Yeah? Let's take it. So we've got these rows of houses. Some of them are, let's say these were all terraced houses. Yes, a whole row of terraced houses. And we get to the end of the road, but the end of the road is open, right? And then on the next side of the road, we've got another row of terrace houses, and then a gap, and then another row of terrace houses, and a gap, and then another row. Now, those gaps between the terrace houses, the internal area, space in between, was considered to be a public domain. Those houses are private domains because they're fully enclosed. The internal area is not fully enclosed, and therefore it's a public domain. And therefore, you couldn't transfer something from one of those houses into the communal area. Okay? Because they're clearly two different domains. However, if you're in some way able to plug the gaps between them, so for example, these houses actually do have gaps, right?
Yeah.
They're not full terraces, all right? They're semi-detached. So,
But
and the end of the road,
and they have side entrances, don't they?
They have side entrances, yeah, that's not necessarily important. But the end of the roads are still open.
Yes.
If we can in some way plug the gaps between those houses and the end of the roads, we could create one enclosed area. Now, the beauty of an Eruv is, the way of plugging those gaps is that you don't need to have solid brick walls, and you don't have to have solid fences from ground to ceiling. You can have, actually you can just, rather than plug in the gap, you can bridge the gap. Okay? So you could run a piece of wire, this is exactly what happens. If you run a piece of wire, let's say between those two houses, from one wall to the next, you've effectively joined the two houses, notionally. Okay? Like, as someone mentioned, the gate, right? It's just like a gate. You've got two...
So it's a symbolic rule.
Symbolic, yeah. You've got two doorposts, and you've got a lintel, right? And that's... Yeah?
Just join the lintels up.
No, join the posts up.
Posts.
The posts.
Right.
Yeah, so let's say the end of our road, we haven't got two houses where we can run a wire between the two houses, so what we do is, we put a post at one end, and a post at the other end, and we run a wire across the top. That gives us our doorway. Okay? Doorways are allowed in private domains. It's not considered to be a break in the enclosure, because all enclosures are allowed to have gates, openings in them. Sorry to keep you up. So that is how, in fact, that's how the Eruv works. So, for example, let's go back to our illustration.
Does it have to be a specific height?
It has to be above 10 tefachim. It has to be above a meter high. Yes, minimum.
That's all?
A minimum. Yes, that's the minimum.
That's really low,
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah, pretty low. Yeah, 1 meter. Okay, so let's go back to our maps. Everybody familiar with Hampstead? Yes, Hampstead Heath. Yes, yes. Kenwood, we're getting very close. Yes, Kenwood. Now, this is the major area. So everyone was familiar with the Northwest London Eruv was particularly controversial in its day. Yes, because there were those who disputed one particular point in the Eruv, and the problem was this point known as Spaniards Inn. Yes. So Spaniards Inn? Yeah, if anyone's driving knows that's an absolute nightmare, isn't it? Yes? It's a small gap. Are you all familiar with it? Yes? It's a small gap between pub and a wall. I don't know what the other wall is. Okay. Now, in fact, this gap is not a very good example because that's the only gap within the Eruv that they weren't able to bridge because they couldn't get permission because the Heucher Fensters in Hampstead didn't want a piece of wire going across. They didn't want. They couldn't physically. They couldn't narrow the gap any more than it already was by putting 2 posts there, and therefore that is the only actual opening within the whole Eruv. So that's a bad example. I'll give you a better example of our idea of the 2 posts, the 2 door posts and the lintel. Let me give you another example. Can I just borrow yours because it's easier on colour than it is on black and white. They just had to open, but they were of the opinion because there's an opinion that since it's only a small gap, it's not considered to be significant enough. Yeah, exactly. So if you look, let's take between NW2 and NW3 at the bottom of Finchley Road or Finchley Lane, I think it must be. Can you see in the yellow? Right at the bottom. Here. On the E of Finchley. Can you see the E of Finchley? Yes? See the E of Finchley? Okay, so you can clearly see there, that is a road, right? Which is running between Childs Hill and Golders Hill Park. Okay? Now if you were to go there, you would probably not notice it, but there are, on either side of the road, there will be a telegraph pole on either side, and you'll probably even be able to see a very thin piece of nylon wire going across the top, bridging the gap between. Okay,
Must it be wire?
Huh?
Must it be?
No, it doesn't have to be wire, but it's the easiest thing, which is the most unobtrusive thing. Okay, so that's how the Eruv works, right? The continuous boundary Eruv effectively turns a large area into some sort of imaginary courtyard within which anyone is allowed to carry objects or push objects, otherwise forbidden on Shabbos. So an Eruv converts an area in which there are many individual Jewish homes into one big home shared by one Jewish family. And that was the irony of the North West London Eruv, because again, instead the word Eruv means joining together, mingling, and it caused quite a division between the community there.
Different Jewish groups were arguing about it?
Yes.
Oh, it wasn't other
Yes.
people?
No. Well, there were outside objections as well, but that's for other reasons. But the religious objections were based on that small point. Yes. Okay. So the Eruv accomplishes a merger of different domain types into one domain type, making carrying. We said that already, haven't we? Okay. Now, somebody asked me. 1 second. Somebody asked me about why couldn't we just use the boundaries of the M25 to make the whole of London one big Eruv, and why therefore do we have a North West London Eruv, there's an Edgware Eruv, there's a Boreham Wood Eruv, there's a Stanmore Eruv, there is a Chigwell Eruv in the planning, being planned. Yes, Chigwell in the planning. Well, apparently there were plans years ago for one. But apparently people got carried away. Okay, so of some of the restrictions that would invalidate an Eruv, firstly there would be areas that may be impossible to bridge. That's one possibility why you can't do it. Another reason why the whole of London will come make into one giant Eruv is because, remember we said an Eruv in effect turns multiple domains, both public and private, into one large private domain. Now the problem is, the definition of a private domain is not only that it has to be surrounded on all sides, but it has to be small enough to be considered to be a private domain. And the definition of small enough is that less than 600,000 people go through it on any one day. Now the problem is, if you have the M25, 600,000 people do not go through it every day, they get stuck on it every day. Yeah.
It's a giant car.
Right. But
That seems a very arbitrary figure.
arbitrary at all. Somewhere in here. Yeah. It's a source of great discussion. But that was the figure. 600,000 is considered to be of such a proportion, and then that number 6 within Judaism is, we talk about 1/60th. Yeah, the number 60 and multiples of it refers to a significant number of people. Okay, so once we reach that level, and you're right, it could have been anything, but that's the absolutely. But that's the point where we have to you have to make at some point you have to say that is the point where it's considered to be too large a number for it ever to be considered a private domain. Yeah. So if there's if part of the Eruv, if within this domain more than 600,000 people would pass during one day, it can never be considered, however well surrounded it is, it can never be considered to be a private domain. So therefore, an area including the M25 would not be able, would exceed that. There was in some question, the fact that you see again northwest on the Eruv, you see the North Circular cuts right through it. Some questions were, how many people use the North Circular every day? They made some calculations and they were clear it was nowhere near the 600,000 mark, but you see that it's not so difficult.
Does it not have to be a certain area where you can walk from one side to the other? I mean, it seems an awful long way from...
No, not necessarily. That's not a requirement. The requirement is that as long as it's enclosed, you can walk as far as you like.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
you have said the minimum is 1 metre. There are double-decker buses going through this particular area.
Minimum.
Yes, you said
Yeah.
minimum. Is there a maximum height? Because I've noticed double-decker buses will be going through this particular area
Yeah.
on this map. So is there a maximum height?
No, there isn't a maximum. As far as I'm aware, there's no maximum.
So
No.
double-decker buses
Yeah,
are permitted?
absolutely fine. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Also, so that's the only one we need to worry about. If there's such a large number of people going through it, that would automatically mean this could never be defined as a private domain, and the Eruv wouldn't even work. One other point is to make is this is a side point, but there's nothing to stop non-Jews entering the Eruv area either on Shabbos or at other times. Okay, this is one of the objections that were put forward by residents, non-Jewish residents, and even some Jewish residents within the proposed Eruv areas, who said you're turning it into a Jewish ghetto, and you're making it into you're discriminating against Jews and non-Jews. There's absolutely nothing within halakha that concerns who goes into it, who doesn't go into it.
And
Okay.
is it someone's job to check it? Like,
I come to yes. Okay.
job.
Next question: what does an Eruv look like? What does it actually look like? Well, we touched on it a little bit. So we said an Eruv must be made of walls or doorways at least 10 tefachim in height, approximately 1 meter or 40 inches. In the public areas where it's impractical to put up walls, doorways are constructed, as we said, out of wire and posts. 2 posts with a wire running along the top. It is these doorways, which often serve no practical purpose, that are usually referred to as an Eruv. People always think that those poles and wires are the actual Eruv. No, all they're doing is bridging the gaps between the naturally occurring Eruvs. Okay, so for example, Bishop's Avenue in Hampstead. That again, if you look at your maps, if not mistaken, Bishop's Avenue. The houses in Bishop's Avenue, although they're detached houses. Yes, those rows of houses actually form a boundary of the Eruv. Okay, and famously, I remember Diane Ehrentreu, who was the halakhic authority behind this Eruv. I remember he said there was some residents of that area who objected to their houses being used for the Eruv. Of course, they don't notice it, they won't be it, but that was their objection. Their human rights were being invaded. So he suggested if they didn't like it, they could always knock one of their houses down. There you go. So, but the interesting point is to know that the houses themselves, if they're in a row like that, they are forming a natural Eruv, a natural part of the Eruv, and anywhere where there are those natural boundaries, like we said, those walls or the fences, then those points are bridged by the doorposts, the doorways. Yeah.
It looks like it's just the houses. What about the gardens? I assume that the garden is part of that.
Yeah, as long as the garden is enclosed. Yes. As long as it has a fences around it or hedges around it, that's included as part of the house. Yeah.
So the Eruv goes round the front of the house, then, not across the big gardens at the back.
I'm not exactly sure for each house. I'm not exactly sure. I understand what you're saying, but it could be either. It could be the front of the house, or it could be the back of the house. I'm not exactly sure where on the boundary it is. Okay, so an Eruv is in terms of what does it actually look like. If you want to go and look, if you want to go in for an outing to look at an Eruv, the problem is it's quite difficult to spot an Eruv since it mostly relies on natural boundaries such as terrace houses and continuous fencing. However, as we said, where there are gaps, they are filled by wires suspended across two poles, thus forming a link between one stretch of the perimeter and the next. Existing lampposts or telegraph poles are used to be as unobtrusive as possible. There is one where you will notice one, possibly, if you ever noticed, driving along North Circular, you're going westbound along North Circular, coming up to Kinloss, Henley's Corner, yes? Before you come up the hill, before you go into a short tunnel,
Yes,
you'll notice going across the road. Well, you won't see it. You won't see the wire. But if you look to either side of the road, you'll see on one side of the road, in the middle of the central reservation, and on the other side of the road are some sort of dark green poles. That is part of the Eruv. Yeah, that's it. Okay, but as I said, you may have never noticed that, and there are plenty of other ones you may have never noticed them. Okay, how is the Eruv funded? Yeah, how is it paid for? Okay, it's not paid for by government grants. The Jewish communities had to raise all the money it's needed to go through all the planning procedures and the cost of construction and the continuing cost of the upkeep. And that brings on to the question of how is the Eruv checked? Because obviously, if we're relying on these poles with wires on them, obviously they can be affected by high winds and bad weather. And in fact, each Eruv has its own alert system. Particularly if you're online, you can go online and check. That's what you're meant to do. You're meant to go online on Friday and check that the Eruv is up. And what will happen is on a Friday, and other times as well, but particularly just before Shabbos comes in, there will be people who will go round, and they won't check all the boundaries because obviously the more permanent ones, the more solid ones, don't need regular checking. It's the ones which are in danger, could possibly have been tampered with or been affected by the weather. They'll just check that the poles and the wire is intact, and they will declare that the Eruv is valid. Okay, so that's what they do. People will go around checking to make sure that everything is intact before Shabbos. Okay, where else are there Eruvim? So I told you here in London, northwest London. Manchester actually. Yeah, Israel. There are around the world there are over 200 so far. 200 Eruvim so far. Several in New York. Some are over 100 years old. There's one in Boston, Los Angeles, Chicago, as well as Toronto, Vancouver, Warsaw, Sydney, Melbourne, Johannesburg, Strasbourg, Antwerp, Gibraltar, Venice, Paris, and of course northwest London and Israel. Okay. Yeah, so there's lots of them all over the place. Okay? Yeah.
When Gemma was at school, they used to have an Eruv all around the school. They had the posts, the large telegraph poles with a wire.
Right, this is a Carmel. Yeah, so that they could go from the buildings out into the surrounding grounds.
Use the whole of the school
grounds. Yeah, absolutely.
Gemma used to go around with the boy on a Friday, checking the Eruv.
Right. Again? Yeah.
Is the whole of Israel have an Eruv, or is it individual
No,
towns?
individual towns. Individual towns will have their own
So if you
Eruv.
you'd want to check
Yeah.
depending upon where
Yeah,
you
you have to check
stayed.
depending where exactly and where they actually run.
What would happen if there was a storm on a Friday night and it got damaged over
So the advice that Ronnie give is if you think that it's possible because of the heavy bad weather conditions that the Eruv is down, then you don't rely on it.
Right.
Okay, if then you're in any doubt. Okay. Okay. One of the most important questions asked in the accusations made against an Eruv is an Eruv a halachic loophole? Well, interestingly, and this is why this has been levelled at an Eruv, because rabbis are often accused of making Judaism harder, right? Imposing restrictions on us, telling us what we can't do, and things that people think are unnecessary and overburdensome. The Eruv, by contrast, is something where the rabbis have, with full authority of the sources going all the way back, as I said, to here, which is, comes from Sinai itself, they're able to implement a relaxation or a valid way of allowing people to enjoy Shabbos to the full. Okay? So is it a halakhic loophole? No.
I think it's great for people that Oh, disabled.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for those who normally would be housebound.
Women with
Fantastic.
diabetes,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. Yeah,
Right,
yeah. Yeah.
So where can we have
Rabbi, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
If this was taken at the time of Sinai, and they were all together in a big
But if you do.
tented enclosure,
Yeah.
why should they have thought at some point they would be in a country so vast they would need something like this?
Okay, good question. So you said that when the Torah was given, it was given in the desert. Well, this is the perfect example. This is we learn many of the laws of Shabbos and lots of other things from the fact that they were encamped in the desert in tents. The fact that the Jewish encampment. Did everyone hear the question?
No.
Ah.
I'm going to repeat the question.
The question was, why should they have planned for a time when the Jewish people perhaps would live in a bigger country when they were in a tented environment, a very small tented environment? For them, I mean, you can't see into the future. So it seems unusual to think that they would have planned for a time when they were
But they lived in walled cities.
in a
didn't they?
country of their own.
Right, but then, but what you're assuming is that the Torah then was the laws of the Torah were man-made. You're saying that how could they have envisaged a situation where we would be living within an area we need an area? The Torah is divine, yes. The Torah includes in it. Torah includes in it all the requirements necessary for all eventualities. Okay.
All eventually.
All eventualities, yes. Yes. When they stood at Sinai, there was no electricity, and yet we have the principles through which we can understand how we as Jews relate to electricity.
With regards to what?
Sorry. In regard, let's say, for Shabbos, are you allowed to switch on the light on Shabbos? It wasn't one of the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not turn on the lights on Shabbos.
Or even strike a flint or whatever.
Well, there's something similar to that, but there was something like that. Creating fire on Shabbos is forbidden. So the rabbis, through the methods through which the concepts they were given, they were able to derive from the information that we have to expand it in order to apply it to developing situations.
But you can make anything, you can expand on anything, and all of a sudden you find you're totally away from the original concept because you've expanded the whole thing.
Yeah, and like we're doing now, we're getting onto a different subject. But just to summarise briefly, that of course the principles are laid down and the ways of understanding are laid down, the traditions of understanding are laid down. So you're right, you can't just derive anything from nothing. Okay, it has to be within certain limits. Okay, so coming on from that, yes.
Yes, I accept.
Okay, good. Okay, so is it a halakhic loophole? The answer is no. It is halakhic law. The Talmud and the codes devote a whole section to the laws of building an Eruv, and throughout the generations our rabbis have blessed and praised communities in which an Eruv was built. And as I said, you've got a whole volume of Gemara here that discusses the intricacies of how Eruvim are to be constructed. Okay, I was going to share with you an interesting little quotation from a major halakhic source known as the Ben Ish Chai from the 19th century, who sort of envisaged the future furore that will be about Eruvim, whether it considered to be halakhic loophole. And in fact, he says, I'll just read you a little bit about it. He says, in the Gemara it's written, when King Solomon, peace upon him, established the law of the Eruv, so we can see it goes all the way back to King Solomon, in practical terms, and the washing of the hands, and Tilas Yadayim. So of the number of things that King Solomon instituted, one of them was the establishment of an Eruv, meaning turning it from the concept into a reality, and the rules regarding the Tilas Yadayim, washing of the hands in the morning, which we discussed way back. Okay? Says the Gemara, when he instituted those two things, a heavenly voice declared, my son, if your heart is wise, my heart will also be gladdened. And one can ask, why do they say this verse when he instituted the Tilas Yadayim, and not when he established the laws of Eruv? He says, it seems to me, with the help of heaven, that when the law of Eruvim was established, there arose the opportunity for foolish and simple people to argue that the Eruv was established for enjoyment, in order to lift the heavy burden of the prohibition to carry from one place to the other, and that the intention is not l'shem shemayim, for the sake of heaven, and in the spirit of Hashem, as he initially involved in this decree. What is he saying in essence? What is he saying? That if you think that the rabbis instituted this concept of Eruv in order to lighten the burden. If you think that was the reason they did it, you're mistaken. The reason they did it is because it's a completely valid halachic concept. And they did it because that is what is allowed. Okay? The fact that, by extension, it does lighten the burden on those who wouldn't otherwise be able to go out on Shabbos is a byproduct of it. But that wasn't the original intention why rabbis did it. Okay? They didn't do it to win votes. Do you understand that point? Yeah? So, coming back to this idea, is it a loophole? No. Does it seem a little bit preposterous that you can make a notion, you can make this area, you can make a wide open area like Northwest London into a private domain so you can transfer from one side to the other? Yes, a little bit. But was it done? Does it have no basis whatsoever? No, of course it does, because the rabbis otherwise wouldn't have done it. They did it because it's perfectly permitted within the remit of halakha that we can, just as you said, a figure can seem arbitrary. The definition of a private domain and a public domain can also seem arbitrary. How do we define something as a private domain? Well, we saw as we went around the room. When I said to you, what would you call a private domain? Some people said houses. Some people said, I don't know what else you say. Gardens. Yeah. We could all come up with a different definition. The halachic definition, which is the definition we work by, is that it's an area which is enclosed, in contrast to a public domain, which is an area which is not enclosed. So if we are able, in a proper way, to convert public and private areas into one private area, then we may do so. Is that point clear?
If it deems, the rabbis deem it an important thing, the Eruv, then why haven't the Rabbonim made it available? Okay, it's available in Northwest London and north of the North Circular. Why haven't all the Rabbonim got together and said, right, we're going to make an Eruv? Like you have a mikveh in each area, why isn't it deemed as important to have an Eruv, say, in Redbridge and I don't know, wherever there's lots of Jews in Leeds and Lounge? Do you understand?
I hear what you're saying. I think you're coming at it from the wrong angle, which is the Rabbonim would be more than happy to do it, but it has to be with the support of the people. If there isn't a demand for it, there's no point the rabbi saying we're going to make an Eruv. Okay, because as I said, I actually saw plans for a Redbridge Eruv. Years and years ago there were plans. Okay, but as I said, it needs public backing. It needs both in ideas and financial, right? And if there's not enough demand for it, you won't get the financial backing for it. Okay. Okay.
I understand.
So it's not the rabbi standing in the way. The rabbi, I can categorically tell you, all of my colleagues would be more than happy for there to be an Eruv in this area. Okay, we've discussed it on many occasions, but it's a non-starter because we haven't got a groundswell of opinion that says we must have an Eruv in this area. Edgware, Boreham Wood, Northwest London, the rabbis didn't say we're imposing an Eruv on you. People came to them and said we want an Eruv. We want to be able to enjoy Shabbos to the full through this halachically accepted method, and therefore they were able, with public support, and it takes a lot of planning. It's very, very difficult. It took months, if not years and years, of planning, of public inquiries and planning applications and so many things and objections and getting down to the practical elements of it, raising the money, getting the Eruv established, getting it maintained. All these things. It's a huge job. So it's not by any means the rabbi saying we don't want to do it. It's the fact that it takes a lot of effort, part of the whole community, to get it done. Okay? Yeah.
Why has an Eruv been put up in Bushy Cemetery?
That's something.
Please.
Okay, that's something completely different.
I asked that question.
That's something completely different. That's something completely different. That's for the Kohanim. That's for the Kohanim. Okay, they're not allowed to come into contact with the dead. Okay, so it makes it a separate, makes the past separate from the rest. We're separate way. Okay. Any other questions with regard to this type of Eruv? Okay, because in fact there are different types of Eruvin. Okay. I know we come to the end of the term, but I've got to keep you alert. Okay, there is another type of Eruv that you may also be familiar with, but not totally understand. Sometimes you may see or hear the term Eruv Tavshilin. Same word again, E-R-U-V. New word, Tavshilin. T-A-V-S-H-I-L-I-N. Tavshilin. Sorry?
No, it's when you can make a proper high pieces of food along the way, so you can walk certain distances.
No, that's another Eruv. That's Eruv Techumim, but I'm not sure we'll go into that one tonight. Okay, Eruv Tavshilin. Eruv Tavshilin, this has practical relevance to all of us. Right. Now, coming back to Shabbos. In fact, no, let's tell a bit of Yom Tov for a moment. Okay, now on Yom Tov, the only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov, there are two differences. Firstly, on Yom Tov, apart from Yom Kippur, you are permitted to transfer from one domain to another. Okay? Even without an Eruv. Okay? So you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov, except for Yom Kippur, because that's considered to be like Shabbos. And on Yom Kippur, in an Eruv, you can carry. Okay? Because it's like Shabbos. Okay? Now, so that's the first difference. On Yom Tov, except for Yom Kippur, you're permitted to transfer from one domain to the other. You're allowed to carry. The second difference is, on Yom Tov, you're permitted to cook for the needs of Yom Tov. Which are not allowed to do on Shabbos. That's the second difference. You're allowed to cook from an existing flame. Okay, you can't create flame, but you're allowed to cook from it. Okay? Whereas on Shabbos you can't cook things from raw. Okay. Now, the ability to cook on Yom Tov is, as I said, for the needs of Yom Tov. Only for the needs of Yom Tov, for that day. So you couldn't think, well, I've got a few hours spare, I'm not doing anything else, I'll start cooking for the rest of the week, for the days which aren't Yom Tov. The rabbis didn't want us doing that because that spoils the special nature and the atmosphere of Yom Tov. It just turns it into a work day. Right? So you're not allowed to do it. You only can cook for that particular day itself. Now, the only way that restriction is relaxed is when you have a situation, as you have some years, when Yom Tov and Shabbos coincide or follow each other in particular order. So for example, you've got Yom Tov on a Thursday and a Friday, and then the day after Yom Tov is Shabbos. So whereas normally you'd prepare your chicken soup and your chopped liver and your chocolates, anything that needs cooking on Friday, Erev Shabbos, which is not a normal weekday Friday. When you've got 2 days Yom Tov, Thursday, Friday, then Shabbos you've got no opportunity to prepare fresh food for Shabbos. Because you can't cook on the Friday, which is a Yom Tov, for the next day, because that is considered to be not Yom Tov. It's not Yom Tov anymore. You understand? So although it's not a weekday, it's not a Yom Tov, and therefore you can't cook on Yom Tov for that day, unless you make an Eruv Tavshilin. Tavshilin literally means, the word Eruv we know means a mingling or a merging. Tavshilin means cooked foods. The merging of cooked foods. The rabbis permitted, through the method of an Eruv Tavshilin, that you can cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. If before Yom Tov, am I going too quickly? Yes. Okay, so the rabbis permit us, through means of an Eruv Tavshilin, to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Whereas normally you wouldn't be allowed to cook on Yom Tov for the next day that is not Yom Tov. How is that permitted? Well, very much like the Eruv we've been talking about up to now, we merge domains, or we merge different things. Here we're merging cooked foods. So, on Erev, you have to listen to the difference now. On Erev Yom Tov, which means the day before Yom Tov, or the eve of Yom Tov, you make an Eruv Tavshilin. What you do is you take a plate and you take 2 pieces of cooked food. Generally people take a challah roll, or a piece of matzah, a boiled egg, or a piece of fish, or a piece of meat, something cooked, which you will be eating on Shabbos. And you make a declaration over it. This Eruv, this mingling, this food, which you've cooked before Yom Tov, is going to allow me to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Am I being
You
clear?
actually say something.
You do it on.
Yes, you make a declaration. It's in the Siddur. Yeah, you make a declaration.
You do it
Through
on
these
Wednesday.
cooked foods, what we're doing is we're merging Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay? We're making Shabbos really into an extended Yom Tov. Okay? Let me just check with the notes that I'm explaining it properly. Yeah, the Eruv Tavshilin makes it possible to begin preparing for Shabbos before Yom Tov and continuing to do so. So what is it doing? You're taking food that you've cooked before Yom Tov started and to continue to cook it on Yom Tov.
Notionally.
Well, no, actually. Because you'll be cooking other things. Those things are already cooked. But it's what it's saying is, I've started the cooking process. I've started cooking things for Shabbos. I've started my preparations for Shabbos before Yom Tov. And those things I'm setting aside in order to enable me to continue my preparations on Yom Tov itself for Shabbos. Okay? Is that what I was to say? Is that point clear?
Yes.
So we set aside on Erev Shabbos. Sorry, we set aside on Erev Yom Tov an Eruv Tavshilin of cooked foods that signify that our preparations for Shabbos have started before Yom Tov and allow us to continue our preparations for Shabbos on Yom Tov.
Yeah.
Should I say that once more?
No,
You dare me?
I dare you. But I think we inappropriate.
I'm sure I could.
Does that have to be done by yourself in your home? Or I understood it to be done by the Rabbi of the community?
That's a very good question. You'll notice it in the declaration you find in the Siddur, or in the beginning of most Yom Tov Machzorim, except for Yom Kippur's Machzor, obvious reasons. There is that declaration in there, in which it says, may these foods allow me to cook, bake, and do all of the preparations which are necessary for me and my household, and in brackets it will say, and for those people within thy town. Right? That you say in case people haven't made their own Eruv, right? And the rabbi of the town will make that declaration with in mind those people who've forgotten to make an Eruv. But you shouldn't rely on that. Everybody should make their own Eruv Tavshilin. Okay? And the foods that you set aside on Erev Yom Tov, as for the Eruv Tavshilin, should be eaten on Shabbos. Okay?
What if you forget to?
If you forget, it's not a problem. You should try to. The bigger problem is what happens if you ate them on Yom Tov. There's a question whether the Eruv whether you'd be allowed to cook as well. Well, there you can rely on that. Yes, but if they no longer.
They will come round to you for sure.
I was about to say
Pleasure.
that.
Pleasure. I'm out.
Good idea.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Right, you could do the how much more on the, for the office.
Yeah.
Now, and you do the eggs and everything. Now, are you talking about something that's been pre-cooked beforehand, or can you take a raw chicken and cook it?
No,
You can't do that.
it should be cooked food.
So it's cooked food,
Yeah.
and you heat it up.
Yeah, you can heat it up. Yes.
Yeah, not
Yes. One
make
second.
a
So it should be the foods that you use for the Eruv should be cooked foods because you started the cooking process before Yom Tov, and it allows you on Yom Tov to cook from raw those things that you'll be eating on Shabbos to go with it. Okay, so let's say you've already cooked. You've baked your challah and you've cooked your chicken on the Wednesday, okay, or the Thursday Erev Yom Tov. You use that as your Eruv Tavshilin, and then on Yom Tov, on the Friday, you can cook your potatoes, your kanedlach, your things, all from scratch in order to go with it.
Yeah, but it's there, it's a shilling. Is that not the bits you leave on a plate, like the egg and a biscuit or the egg and a bit of challah, or challah roll and the light? Is that not there?
It's the Eruv is made of the cooked foods.
It's the cooked
It's the cooked foods which you set aside during Yom Tov,
Yeah.
and you eat them on Shabbos together with the other foods that you're now being allowed to cook from scratch on Yom Tov Shabbos.
Maybe instead of an egg and a boiled egg,
Yeah.
that has to be eaten.
It should be eaten on
On the
Shabbos.
day.
On Shabbos. On Shabbos, yeah. Should be. No, you should eat it. Because those are things to show that you've prepared it.
Even if you've made eggs before, the same thing.
Yeah, but you should take it, those should be eaten on Shabbos, because that's what it
Put a
signifies.
half a dozen.
Yeah.
You take one eye for this.
To make sure that you've got some aside for Shabbos, yeah. So that should go with it. Okay, everybody clear on that, David?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
I presume Eruv can't be taken continuous. So what gap is allowed if there are gaps? Layers of football and another second. There are going to be small gaps between.
We're coming back to the first area.
Yes.
Yeah. So what gaps?
How big is it?
Oh, right. So I can't give you the exact dimensions. I haven't got it off the top of my head. The question was where there are some gaps which aren't like. So the Northwest London area, there was only one area that hasn't been. They couldn't do it. Spaniards in. Okay. So the wrap.
Between houses.
Yeah.
They're often.
So one second. There's an important question back with our area, and we'll finish on this. Okay. One second. Let me answer it. I can't give you the exact dimensions, but if it's smaller than a certain amount, then it's considered not to be a break at all. It's insignificant, and that was the whole point surrounding Spaniards in. It's a very small gap, as anyone who tried to drive through it knows. Yeah? It's not they couldn't bridge it. They looked into it and they measured it and they said it's not considered to be big enough. It's considered to be a unbreachable or a breach in the area. I'm not even going to hazard a... Yeah, it's about probably about 6 foot, isn't it? Yeah.
Buses go through it.
Why did King Solomon invent it or bring it on when he's got a woman sitting at it?
It's not that he invented it.
No, not invented
He took it. He was the first one to take it from conceptual to action. First one to employ it.
For what reason if you already lived in
I don't know the historical background, so I'm sorry. I don't know.